Welcome everyone to the May Patch Tuesday. For those of you who were joining us last month, we had a little bit of an interesting episode. We were actually down in Texas live. So Todd and I were actually in at our Ivanti security or our Ivanti Solution Summit, and had a chance to have a live presentation in front of those who were attending the conference. So we did attempt to do that, and we had a little bit of a sound quality issue. So apologies for that. This month should be a little bit better. Todd and I are both back in kind of our normal working environments, and so hopefully the sound quality issues will be no concern this month. All right, we will go ahead and get started here. So first up, we're going to talk about the May Patch Tuesday release, giving you an overview of what a lot of the things that came out were. We're going to go through a little bit of the recent news here. There were several 0 days between Google, Microsoft, and Apple that we're going to discuss. And then Todd is going to walk us through the bulletins and releases for this month. And then we'll wrap up with our regular conversation around between the Patch Tuesdays. That's our kind of recap of everything that released post-April before the May Patch Tuesday event. Helps to give a perspective on all the things that are out there and that you may have also needed to make sure are included in your next round of maintenance if they haven't already been tended to. So starting off, we did have a big lineup, especially from the third-party side. Adobe had their Adobe Acrobat release, Acrobat and Acrobat Reader, and they did release a number of other solutions as well. But the Acrobat and Acrobat Reader is kind of the main one that people need to make sure they're getting updated as more frequently than the others. A lot of the other applications that Adobe runs, they tend to do their prioritization based on likelihood of their solutions being targeted. So Adobe Acrobat and Reader, a lot more prevalent in a lot of environments, making it a more target-rich solution to go after. A product like Illustrator, you might have a handful in a very large organization, maybe one in a smaller organization. So not really as broad of an ability to target. So threat actors tend to focus on widespread applications that are going to be in a lot of places where they get target-rich environments. So that's how Adobe kind of classifies their updates. See, I'm being told I'm getting a little bit of a audio breakup. Hopefully this is a little bit better. Todd, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, you're sounding okay, Chris.
Okay, got it.
Well, one thing you might mention there, Chris, on that one, you'll notice that we don't have you have critical 0 and important 0. Adobe did rate this one as a 3 in their rating system. And Chris and I talked it over, and we kind of put a moderate rating on it because there were 9 criticals out of the 12 vulnerabilities that were in there. And since it's so heavily used, we updated it to a moderate. And you'll see that when I get to the bulletin side, in case you're wondering, hey, they don't have a critical or important number in there. So just kind of a heads up on that one.
Yep. Apple did have their release as well. So kind of 4 major bulletins that we're tracking there. 1 was critical, 3 important. Google did have a update, on Monday that was resolving a 0 day. We'll also talk about another 0 day that was just resolved last week as well. So we got kind of a very close multiple release series of updates from Google Chrome, which also means that Microsoft Edge received similar updates. On the Microsoft side, 5 bulletins that Todd will be talking us through. 1 of those is critical. That's the SharePoint update. There were 2 bulletins that were important. And then there were some additional moderate updates from them this month. And then we have Mozilla. Mozilla did release Firefox and Firefox ESR, and those were rated as important this month. So getting into some of the news that we're looking at here, Chrome now has 6 0-day vulnerabilities that they've resolved this year. There were last week on Thursday, Chrome had released a update to resolve one of those 0 days, and then on Monday they resolved the other, and then Edge updated last Friday, and then again yesterday on Patch Tuesday. So that pair of 0 days, if you get up to the latest, you're going to resolve both of those. So just make sure that you're verifying you're up to the latest Chrome and Edge updates, and you should be resolving both of those 0 days that came out very close together. We're going to talk about the Apple RT Kit 0 day as well. This is not a new 0 day. This is Apple. The way they do things is they resolve things in their latest version first. So the RT Kit 0 day was actually resolved first back in March on the latest OSs for macOS and iOS and iPad. This month, their focus was on Ventura from the macOS side, and then the basically the equivalent versions of iPad and iOS. So not a net new 0 day, but one that they hadn't gotten to on their older platforms yet. So they're basically backporting that down into the older branches of their operating system. And then we're going to talk about Microsoft's 2 0-day vulnerabilities. So for those of you who have been on here regularly, I'm about to share my screen. When that happens, you're going to see that the windows involved are going to be shuffling around. Feel free to enlarge the shared screen for a period of time here while I go through a couple of the web links, and then we'll switch back to the slides here in just a moment. So for those of you new to the On24 platform, you'll get used to this as we shift through. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen then. All right, that should be good. All right. So the first article here is talking about the Chrome 0 days. I've actually got 2 links. Each of them kind of give a slightly different variation of what was going on. The first one here talks about the new CVE 2024-4761. This is a out-of-bounds write impacting the V8 JavaScript and WebAssembly engine within Chrome. So this is actively being exploited. It could allow the attacker to corrupt data or induce a crash or execute arbitrary code on the compromised host. Google has been informed of attacks targeting this vulnerability. The other vulnerability, the one that was resolved last week, don't be confused. It's almost identical, but there are 2 digits transposed here. Instead of 4761, it's 4671. So that, I'm guessing there's going to be a number of people who are going to look at that and be like, wait a second, are we talking about the same vulnerability? No, it's 2 different ones, just that one set of digits is transposed there. Interesting that they had those 2 very closely released and happen to have both of those IDs reserved. So this one was they don't describe it here as well. The rest of this article goes on to talk about the other 0 days that have been resolved this year. So 3 of those came out of the Pwn2Own hacking contest back in March. So those of you familiar, this is a hacking competition that's been going on for a number of years now. And basically, white hats are able to show their cybersecurity prowess by doing live exploits of software. And they get more points and AKA more money, the more complicated each of those exploits are. So if they're able to exploit a vulnerability in a single piece of software, that's worth so many points. If they have a combination of, hey, I exploited a Chrome vulnerability, and from there I was able to exploit a OS vulnerability, and then I was able to do something else, that chain of attack is worth more points and nets them more money. So this is the type of competition that flushes out a lot of high-profile vulnerabilities. So right around the March timeframe, there were a number of additional vulnerabilities that were counted as 0 days because they were identified before Google knew about them. And because of the public nature of Pwn2Own, there was a period of time there where basically there was public awareness that these were out there. So this is the list of 5 CVEs before the one that was resolved this Monday, and then this Monday's 4761 being the 6th one for Google Chrome this year. Now that means that Edge has those same 6 vulnerabilities. So when Chrome updates, Edge being a Chromium-based browser, basically needs to update shortly after. So that's why last week we saw the Thursday update from Chrome, followed by a Friday update from Edge. This week, Monday update from Chrome, Tuesday update from Edge. So that's one thing to make sure to keep on aware of is whenever Chrome updates, you've got an Edge update following closely behind it. We have talked about this a little bit before too, but in August last year, Google announced that they were moving Chrome to a regular cadence of updating every week. So every week you can expect a security update from Google Chrome, which means every week you can expect an update for Microsoft Edge as well. So the difference on this article is the dark reading article talked a little bit more about the specific most recent one. It is a sandbox escape let's see if I go down to, talks about the version to get up to. It makes it possible to manipulate parts of the memory which are allocated for more critical functions. So it gets into a little bit more detail about the vulnerability. So it had some good information from researchers at Malwarebytes and a few others that chimed in with a little bit more detail about how nasty this particular vulnerability is. So that just gives a little bit more context there for somebody who wants to read up a little bit more about it. For the most part, though, the real thing you need to understand is you've got 2 0 days in very close succession here, so make sure that both your Chrome and Edge browser updates are applied quickly this month. Apple. This one is the Bleeping Computer article here talks about the fact that this is a backported fix. So again, this was first resolved back in March. The RT-Kit vulnerability first was addressed back then, and in this month's release, so March 5th is when they did the initial resolution for the latest versions of iPhone, iPad, and Mac. So this month, they've now been backporting it to iOS version 16.7.8, iPad 16.7.8, and the macOS Ventura 13.6.7 branches. Improved validation, making sure that the vulnerability is better resolved. So that's just more of an awareness thing here. If you're running some of the older macOS versions, this is just a continuation of resolving that RT-Kit vulnerability, which was actively being targeted. And the last one here is the Krebs article that kind of covers everything that we talked about with all the other vendors here, but also talks a little bit about the two Microsoft vulnerabilities. So CVE 2024-30051 and 30040. Those are the two CVEs that Microsoft resolved this month that were zero-day vulnerabilities. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about those, but this was just a good article that kind of gave an overview of the vulnerabilities and included links to additional write-ups if you want to do some deeper reading on either of these vulnerabilities. So those links are available in the Krebs article. We'll jump over to the two CVEs specifically here. The first one is a Windows DWM Core Library elevation of privilege vulnerability. This does affect the Windows operating system. Microsoft rated it as important, and it has a CVSS score of 7.8. The fact that it's being actively targeted, this is where we've kind of given some additional guidance to say the regular validation there is only goes so far. So now that we know there's a confirmed exploit against these, you should be bumping up that priority. So if you're following our Patch Tuesday content, the infographic that you would have seen us release yesterday would show that the severity on this was important, but the Ivanti priority bumps it up to a priority 1 and the risk level up to a 4. The reason for that is the risk of exploitation is present. There are threat actors out there who can actively take advantage of this. So now that more static way of analyzing that gets the vendor severity or a CVSS score is no longer as relevant. We need to assess with additional risk information included. And that's why we bump up that priority for updates like this. So in this case, an attacker who successfully exploits this vulnerability could gain system level privileges on the target affected system. At that point, they've pretty much got freedom to do a whole lot. They're going to be able to dig in, be able to scrape credentials off of that system, and be able to start looking out around your environment to wherever else that system can see, and be able to try to start using living off the land tactics to move about. So they become much more stealthy past this vulnerability being exploited. And again, the OS versions, pretty much all currently supported versions, are affected by that. The next CVE, the second one from Microsoft that was identified as being exploited this month, is the MS-HTML platform security feature bypass vulnerability. So this is rated as important. CVSS score was a little bit higher. It was an 8.8. Some interesting things about the vulnerability. So in this case, the vulnerability bypasses OLE mitigations in Microsoft 365 and Office. Now, again, this vulnerability is resolved at the OS level, but it's bypassing security features there. So just keep that in mind. You're not going to see an Office update for this as well. It's just the OS that needs to be updated. So the attacker would have to convince a user to load a malicious file onto the vulnerable system, typically by email or instant message, and then convince the user to manipulate the specially crafted file. So that was an interesting use of words here. Manipulate the file, not necessarily open it. So it could be enough where they could say, oh yeah, you need to download this file to your system and rename it to blah, blah, blah. Could that be enough manipulation of the file for them to exploit this? It's a little bit vague in its usage there, but this gives the attacker a little bit more flexibility to not even necessarily have to have the user open the file. Just manipulation of that file may be enough to exploit this. If they're able to exploit the vulnerability, they could gain code execution on the target device. So that ability to execute code is in the context of the user. So this is a case where privilege management comes into play. If the user is running in a more least privilege context, they may not be able to do anything that an admin can do. So the ability to lock down user privileges is going to mitigate the risk of a vulnerability like this to a point. Many of you don't have that luxury. If you're not running some type of privilege management capability within your environment and all your users have local admin rights, then the attacker would gain the context of what that user is running in. So that is one thing to keep in mind there. Least privilege does help with vulnerabilities like this to reduce the potential for the attacker to do more. All right, so that is our lineup of vulnerabilities this month. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. All right. And now I'm going to be switching back over to the slides. So again, you can resize the windows within your screen there, and I'm going to start advancing the slides. We did talk about the 2 known exploits from Microsoft, so I'm going to skip past those slides there, and we'll jump into the Linux section. So there were a couple of Linux vulnerabilities that our friends over at TuxCare gave us to be aware of on the Linux side this month. The first is CVE 2024-2961. The iconv function is used to convert text between different encodings, like UTF-8 to ASCII. And it's used widely in applications and services on the Linux platform. The only mitigation possible here is to update to the most up-to-date version on all distributions of this component. So the update here is the glibc 2.39 and older versions are vulnerable to this. You want to get a newer version of glibc than 2.39. A specific set of parameters could be used to cause a buffer overflow, leading to a crash of the application in that case, calling the iconv function. The second CVE, 2024-27316, is a memory leak that could occur when a program fails to release memory it no longer needs, leading to a gradual consumption of system resources. So in this case, you've got a client continues to send more headers after this point, then Apache will continue to extend the buffer, eventually exhausting all available memory resources. So that's vulnerability in Apache web server. That needs to be updated there. Let's see. Next. CVE 2024-32487. The utility less, a counterpart to more. For those of you familiar with Linux, you'll probably understand that better than those just more on the Windows side. It can be tricked into executing commands if it receives a malicious file as a parameter, crafted in such a way to include a new line character in the file name. So that file name manipulation allows the attacker to exploit this vulnerability. After the new line character is interpreted, it's commonly used chained with other commands to perform tasks sequentially. This can be quite damaging if it's being run in a privileged process. So mitigation there, if the attacker is able to do this and the process they're running in is more privileged, they get a lot more power in doing so. So again, least privilege being a way to mitigate this vulnerability to a degree. The attacker can execute arbitrary OS commands by using these attacker-controlled file names and being able to exploit that. So to mitigate this, you should update the less version to 654. And he's specifically saying, don't simply unset the less open function. So probably some more reading there needed to be able to fully understand that, but basically that less command, it needs to be updated to a version 654 to resolve the vulnerability. All right, on the patch or the Microsoft side again, different Azure and development tool updates that occurred this month. .NET 6, 7, and 8 did receive updates. Azure Migrate, and then also multiple versions of Visual Studio were updated. So most of you are probably not responsible for updating these components as it gets more into the development side of the organization. So this is one area where, depending on your organization and how you're driving vulnerability resolution for the development side, this is an area where you'll want to just make sure that you're coordinating with the security and DevOps teams to make sure that those dev components are being updated to resolve the vulnerabilities identified in these development components.
I would say, Chris, on that screen, usually we have service stack updates included on this screen, on this slide as well, for those of you who watch regularly. We didn't see any independent or standalone service stack updates this month for the older operating systems. So the slide is looking a little bare, but that's why.
Good call out, Todd. And even in the newer OS versions, the servicing stack update is going to be included now instead of being a separate update. So over time, servicing stack updates should just kind of disappear into the monthly updates, if I'm correct, right, Todd?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. All right, Windows Lifecycle. We've got one event coming up in June here. That's the most recent that we need to be aware of. So 21H2 is going to reach its end of support date on 6/11/2024. So that'll be the final security update for 21H2 for Windows 10. And no upcoming long-term service channel support, end of support dates or anything coming there. So nothing to worry about there at the moment. Content notifications, again, for those of you using an Ivanti product, you can always go out to our forums and sign up for those, especially for as we get into the between the Patch Tuesday section. You're going to see a number of updates that have come out over the last few weeks. Subscribing to these content notifications keeps you apprised of when those content updates occur so that you know what's coming out and you can choose when and where to kind of jump in and add additional things in if you need them. For those of you doing more of a continuous patch cycle where especially end user machines are updated more frequently, you've probably updated your products to more dynamically take in new content as it comes out. But if you're statically approving things, these content notifications may make you aware of a 0-day or something else that you might want to take a look at that helps you to respond to things more quickly if needed. All right, Todd, if you want to go ahead and take us through the bulletins.
All right, Chris, let's get started with that. We did have a lot of activity over the last couple of days that we're going to address here. Chris did talk about the latest update for Chrome desktop and talked in detail around the 4761 vulnerability 0-day that was addressed. So be aware of that. There are updates for Mac, Linux, and Windows, and of course rated critical. So kind of at the top of the stack here as far as attention this Patch Tuesday on the browser side. We talked a little bit about the Apple releases as well. On Monday, there was a release for macOS Ventura 13.6.7. Again, this is the backported CVE that Chris talked about, 2024-23-296. I have it highlighted in red there for you. There were some additional vulnerabilities addressed in this release, only 3, but that one's a critical one. So important that you go through and update this one as quickly as possible as well. You'll note that our Apple doesn't really put criticality ratings on their updates, but Chris and I rated this one critical this month to kind of keep them in our schema as far as updates go, and the infographics if you're looking for how we do the rating. I touched on this one at the top of our conversation, the fact that you didn't see a critical or important rating on this one. There were 12 vulnerabilities addressed in Acrobat and Reader. 9 of those were rated critical, which was interesting. None exploited, of course, so nothing critical there from that standpoint. But it is important that you update this as soon as possible, because we know that with vulnerabilities that are rated critical, it's not too long before they could possibly be exploited. For that reason, Chris and I upgraded this from Adobe's rating system, which is 1, 2, and 3. They rated this one very low at a 3. Normally, we would give that an important, but we bumped it up to moderate because of the 9 critical vulnerabilities. So you want to take a look at this one pretty quickly and get it out there in your organization. We did see some updates for Firefox as well. A pretty big one for Firefox 126. 16 vulnerabilities. They rated it overall as a high. And there were 3 high-rated individual vulnerabilities within that particular list of 16. You can go in at the link that we've provided here under Bulletin 2024-21 and take a look at those in more detail. In general, it's important to keep your browsers up to date. There were some questions in the forum that I was answering, and they're like, when's the best time to update your browsers? That's a loaded question these days, because it seems like the updates come out kind of randomly throughout the week. But in general, if I had to make a recommendation, I would say later in the week, like a Thursday or a Friday. Generally, we see most of the updates come out early in the week. So if you have to do it on a weekly basis, I would kind of tend towards later in the week. But again, you want to keep an eye on them, especially when there's 0 days. You never know when they're going to pop up, and you want to get those addressed as quickly as possible. Getting back to the list here, Firefox ESR 115.11 was released as well. 6 vulnerabilities here. Important to note that these 6 are also included in the previous one for the Firefox 126 release. So 100% overlap on those as far as new vulnerabilities go. So they basically just included those 6 in this extended security version for Firefox. Additional third parties, well, we'll treat them as third parties because we're not talking about Microsoft here, but there was another Apple update, a big one for Sonoma. 22 vulnerabilities addressed in this update for 14.5. You want to run through your Apple macOS updates as well. And finally, the oldest version they're currently supporting. Apple does do a 3 OS 3-year support, if you want to think of it that way. Monterey 12.7.5 came out. Just 2 vulnerabilities addressed in this one. Again, only that one 0-day was in the Ventura release, not in the Monterey release. So you'll see I didn't highlight anything. It's not addressed here in red. Now, will they backport it to this particular operating system? Possibly. But this one's approaching end of life here come probably November when they release the next version of Apple, or macOS, I should say. There was an update for the browser, Apple Safari 17.5. These are generally bundled into the Sonoma updates now, so you don't see standalone Safari updates necessarily for Sonoma right now, but this one in particular, 17.5, addresses a vulnerability, CVE 27834. That would be when you apply this on the Ventura and Monterey operating systems. So if you're updating Safari there, you want to make sure that you include this one in your bundle as you do an update on those particular operating systems this month. Finally, moving on to Microsoft's release for the month. Chris mentioned that we did have one critical update. It was for SharePoint Server for the vulnerability shown here. Chris talked a little bit about the 344 shown down below there. Neither of these are exploited or publicly disclosed, but be aware that, again, rated critical. So this one is kind of at the top of your list as far as updating your Microsoft systems this particular quarter, this particular month. The Windows 11 update, we don't see a moderate rating from Microsoft too often, but in this particular month, both the Windows 10 and Windows 11 operating systems, and their related servers, of course, were rated as moderate. We had updates across all the various versions that are supported today. I included those listed here. On the Windows 11 side, there were 41 vulnerabilities addressed. Chris talked about the known exploited and publicly disclosed 351 shown here. And the, I have a typo there. It should be 340. The other one that was known exploited this month as well. So be aware of that one. Something new that did pop up this month as far as a known issue with Windows 11. We haven't had any for a month or two. Interesting how they come up with these sometimes. I don't know the overall importance of what they decide to include, but I included it here. It's the profile picture. Might not be properly set when you do an update, and you might have a challenge with updating your profile picture. These are the instructions from Microsoft. They are working on a resolution. It does appear in both versions of, in particular, of this Windows 11 21H2 and 22H2 editions, as well as 23H2. So it does show up across all of Windows 11 and the related, and Windows 11. Sorry, not the related servers. They don't have Windows 11 servers. On the Windows 10 update, again rated moderate this month. Same to CVEs from a exploitation standpoint. Lots of updates across all of the operating system versions, 21H2, 22H2, as well as the server versions 2016 through 2022. So you want to make sure you address those. We've seen a couple of these known issues being carried forward for several months now. We know about Copilot, an issue with being supported on these older versions of Windows 10. In particular, the way it shows up on the right-hand or left-hand side of your screen. Being able to move your taskbar around horizontally is another issue. Icon displays, we've seen that one now for a couple of months as well. Keep in mind that 21H2 goes away for the education and enterprise versions next month. As Chris mentioned, there's an expiration there. These will probably be dropped off at that particular point. Something new that shows up this month, there is an issue with the Microsoft Connected Cache. We haven't seen this one before. And it's interesting that they call this out now, that it might show up with the KB from back in January of this year. But be aware of this issue in case you bump into it. There is a workaround with some detailed instructions to change the configuration up on these boxes. Essentially, that instead of pointing to a cache location, these will try to get the download directly from the public internet. So this could be problematic depending on your environment. They do provide a workaround with some configuration options, as I said. So you can take a look at the KB article for more details there. And these particular updates also have the issue with the profile picture that I mentioned for the Windows 11 system. So again, another known issue. I'm sure they'll get this one resolved pretty quickly. Server 2022 also has this problem with the profile picture. Moving on to Microsoft Office. It's been hit or miss the last couple of months as far as updates go for the standalone versions of Office. This month we did see an Excel 2016 and an update for Office Online Server. Only rated important, and they're just addressing one known vulnerability, which is not known to be exploited or publicly disclosed. No known issues around this update. So if you are running those, it's rated important this month. We did see an update for Microsoft 365 as well. One vulnerability addressed here across all versions of the Office there, as well as the long-term service channel release for Mac 2021. No known issues around these particular updates. That was it from the Microsoft side and the third-party major releases here on the last couple of days. On Patch Tuesday week, we did have a very active number of releases between the Patch Tuesdays. Since our last update here in April, I've listed them here. We break them out into kind of three categories. We have security updates with CVEs. We have security updates where the vendors do not necessarily include CVEs with their update, but they do call them out as security updates. So we include them here for your viewing. These are all supported in our patch products. That's how we get the information on all these in particular. And then we have non-security updates as well that go out, which are generally performance enhancements, maybe some new features. Depends on what they're releasing in these particular updates. Moving into some of these updates and the CVEs that are associated with them, we'll talk about the Windows side first here, obviously. We did add AutoCAD back into our portfolio. For those of you who are interested, it's available now in both the Windows and Mac versions. They address 19 vulnerabilities in the latest release of 2025.0.1. Kind of a big update there. You'll see on the Mac side as well, the same kind of thing. We have support. We added a release for Apple mobile device support. A 17.5 came out, addressing one vulnerability there. If you noticed on our first slide, and again talking back to the browser side of things, we had 5 releases of Chrome throughout the month between Patch Tuesdays. So if you're scrambling to keep up with this, it is a challenge. Realize that. And again, as Chris mentioned, this particular one is a 0-day down here with the 4671 that came out last week. And of course, 4761, as I showed on the slide earlier this week, with those 2 transposed digits again. But again, lots of Chrome releases to keep up with. We also had the Oracle CPUs, or the critical product updates, come out last month. So you'll see here that I've included all the products that we support from a patch perspective and the CVEs that were supported within the Java environment. It's very interesting to look at this. I don't know if there's differences in the way they report these across all these products, or how they actually include all the various versions, all the different CVEs. But you'll notice that, for example, Azul Zulu has 9 and 10 vulnerabilities addressed in the various versions of these. You'll see that the Java SDKs that came out from Oracle have 7. A lot of overlap, obviously, between the different vulnerabilities that are addressed here. Some of the other ones, like Corretto, they only include 4 of the vulnerabilities in their release. So it's kind of interesting the way these vendors are either reporting them, or if they're actually including them all in each release. But be aware that with whatever product you're using to update Java on your devices, there are updates across all of these particular products to make sure that you get the latest versions of Java and the vulnerabilities addressed. Here's the Corretto. Another one that we support, Eclipse Adoptium. It's been around for quite a while now as well. And finally, we have the Red Hat OpenJDK that runs on Windows to address these particular vulnerabilities as well. Again, a lot of overlap across all of these from the Oracle releases that come out. We did see updates for Firefox between the Patch Tuesdays. Again, quite a few issues here as well. 15 vulnerabilities that came out back on the 16th in version 125 when it was released. Again, they're cumulative. So as I showed the Firefox 126 release that came out this month, yesterday, these vulnerabilities are included in there as well. So as you update, you do get these by default. We saw an update for FileZilla Client this month, addressing one vulnerability. Foxit PDF family of products got some major updates as well across all their versions here, whether it's the editor, the Reader Consumer version, or the Reader Enterprise version. If you're using those, make sure you continue to address these vulnerabilities. We did see an update for Apple iTunes this month. VirtualBox got a pretty big update with 13 vulnerabilities addressed. Some of the smaller tools that you may be using in your environment, like PuTTY, there was vulnerability. This seems to be a common vulnerability. It must be a network-related vulnerability across all these tools. You'll see one in PuTTY. You'll see the same one in Tortoise Git. You'll see it also in Tortoise SVN, so kind of a common vulnerability that was addressed in those particular products. Thunderbird as well got an update this month, as you would expect, along with Firefox and Firefox ESR. WinSCP, again, that same vulnerability was addressed there as well. And finally, we have some updates for Snagit this month as well, in between the Patch Tuesdays. So kind of a large list there on the Windows side. Moving on to the Apple release side, we did have a number of security updates that came out with CVEs. A couple of non-security updates, Google Chrome. We did release a new product support for Emacs for Mac. So if you're using that and patching with our product, it's now available. We are continuing to update our catalogs with a lot of applications. And that's also one of the reasons why this list is growing every month as well. As I said, a lot of releases for AutoCAD this month between the Patch Tuesdays. Version 22, 23, and 25 all got updates. They all got the same 19 vulnerabilities addressed in them. So if you're running any of those products on Mac, make sure you do get those updates in place because they were pretty large. We saw 5 releases for Google Chrome on the Windows side. We see 6 on the Mac side. So again, some overlap between these, some similarities in terms of the version numbering between Windows and Mac. Be aware of that. We did see an update for Microsoft Office Excel between the Patch Tuesdays on the Mac side. The same Firefox updates, the ESR and the regular version as well. And we also saw an update for VMware Fusion between Patch Tuesdays where they included the CVEs. For those of you running Edge on Mac, it continues to get updates kind of in sync, obviously, with the Chrome releases. So you'll see a lot of similarities between these in terms of the vulnerabilities that are addressed in each update. Again, these are the updates for Mac releasing regularly as well. So you can see there's been a lot of activity. In addition to the normal Microsoft releases that we usually talk about, we had a whole host of updates in the last 2 days of product releases on the Apple, Mozilla, and Google side as well. And then, of course, lots of activity between the Patch Tuesdays, especially with all the latest Java releases. So once again, we track those here. Obviously, Oracle's releasing lots of updates across all of their products that we don't include here, but Java seems to be a hot topic. So we tend to include it here as well. With that, Chris, that completes kind of my whole walkthrough on the bulletin side. How are things looking on the question side?
Well, we've got a couple of content-specific questions that the guys are looking at there. So there were a couple of checksum cases that have already been escalated. So those will be getting resolved in a release later today. Typically, what happens in those cases is the installer that originally releases gets changed somewhere throughout the day. You know, it could be something small that changes it, but anything that makes a change to the installer, like in this case, Adobe's Acrobat update was one of those. That's even a small change can change the checksum. So basically, once that's captured, typically we get those turned around within 24 hours. So that's what you're seeing there for those who are experiencing that. We actually already had some cases come in, and we'd already been queuing that up for resolution later today. So those will be resolved very quickly. We did have a couple people asking about the latest curl vulnerabilities. So I did some poking around. I do not see a specific update yet from the Microsoft side. We tend to see curl updates from when they're identified to getting kind of adopted into many platforms. Usually there's like a month or 2 lag time. And it's pretty typical in the Linux world, unfortunately, that those types of projects take a little while to trickle down. So we expect that, you know, probably, I think those curl vulnerabilities were identified fairly recently. So we're probably looking at least next month, if not shortly after, before we would see that be resolved on the Microsoft side. But they have kind of a black box there. They don't really tell us when things like that are coming. So unfortunately, we're going based off of historical and kind of, you know, taking a swag at when to expect it, not giving you like concrete information that we've received directly from Microsoft by any means. So that's the best we can offer on the curl topic. There was a question about the attack vector for the Chrome 0 days. In both cases, they were both basically targeting a specially crafted HTML or web page. So basically, the attacker creates a specific web page that can exploit either of those vulnerabilities, and then they would send that link to a user in any number of ways. So once the user clicks on a link, whether it was a hyperlink in an email off of side-loaded ads from web content on some page, basically once they get to that website, then it should be able to exploit that vulnerability if it's present in the browser. So that's from the reading. I think the one that goes into the best detail on it out of the links out of today's presentation is the dark reading article there. Actually talks a little bit about, they had some feedback from the chief strategy officer from BugCrowd and from one of the researchers at Malwarebytes that gave a little bit more visibility into how the attackers are doing it. So other than that, I think the additional news on Exchange 2019 Server SE lifecycle. We don't have any additional news that you'd find outside of what's in the Microsoft community there. So nothing more that we know beyond what's already being discussed there. Looks like that may be all the questions we have today. I mean, other than the 0 days, it was pretty straightforward Patch Tuesday. No major, hey, we're end-of-lifing, this authentication mode or other things like that like we saw quite a bit last year. There was a lot of complexity in some of those Patch Tuesday releases as we hit some of those milestones and major changes to a lot of components on the Microsoft side. So May was pretty clean overall. Again, I think the biggest thing is get your browsers updated, get your Mac and Windows OSs updated, and most of your risk that's been identified should be pretty well mitigated. The only other one that I would say probably, Brian Krebs in his article talks about this, the SharePoint vulnerability. It was the only vulnerability this month to be marked as critical by Microsoft. That one, there's suspicion that that one will be at some point targeted just because of the nature of it and how much it would allow the attacker to do. It definitely takes a little bit of a heavy lift to get there and requires a certain level of privilege for the user that gets exploited to take advantage of it. But if done, it would give some pretty significant ownership over being able to do things across the SharePoint environment. So that one is one that researchers are kind of suggesting will be a likely exploit in the not too distant future here. So that would be another one to not delay too long, based on what we're hearing from discussions. Other than that, I think that wraps us up. Todd, do you see anything else that we needed to cover?
Nope, looking pretty good to me. I think we got all the questions answered.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody. I know we're getting towards the summer months here, so June, July, I know a lot of people will be starting to get into vacations and things like that. So we hope to see many of you on here. If not, on live, make sure to catch the on-demand recordings as well as those become available. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you again in June.
See you next month. Bye.